The autumn air in Salem County, Oregon was crisp with the promise of an early winter as Magnolia Ashworth pulled her weathered Subaru into the gravel parking lot of Cloverdale Livestock Auction. At 58, she moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned that sudden movements could shatter more than just bones. They could break what little piece you'd managed to salvage from life's cruelties. It had been 8 months since her husband Jasper's sudden heart attack had left her alone on their small lavender farm, and Magnolia still wasn't sure why she'd driven the 40 miles to attend a cattle auction. She didn't need livestock, couldn't afford the feed bills, and had no business being around animals that reminded her so painfully of the life she and Jasper had planned to build together. But something about the advertisement in the Oregon Farmers Weekly had called to her. Final disposition auction. Problem animals. All sales final. Maybe it was the way those words echoed her own feelings of being unwanted, a problem that needed disposing of in the most efficient way possible. The auction barn buzzed with the familiar energy of ranchers, dealers, and curiosity seekers, but Magnolia found herself drawn to the far end of the building where a massive black Angus bull stood alone in a reinforced pen. Even from a distance, she could see why he commanded such fearful respect. Ironheart stood nearly 6 feet at the shoulder, his muscled frame radiating power that seemed barely contained by the heavy steel bars surrounding him. "Wouldn't get too close to that one, ma'am," warned Buck Silverstone, the grizzled auctioneer who'd been running Cloverdale sales for 30 years. "That bull's put 4 men in the hospital in the last 6 months, owners selling him for whatever he can get just to avoid a lawsuit." Magnolia nodded but didn't move away. Instead, she found herself studying Ironheart with the same intensity she'd once brought to her work as a trauma nurse before retiring to help Jasper with their farm dreams. What she saw in the bull's dark eyes wasn't the mindless rage everyone else described, but something she recognized from her years working with difficult patients. Pain so deep it had turned inward, creating a protective shell of aggression. "What's his story?" she asked Buck, surprising herself with the question. "Belongs to the Morrison family up near Portland. They're good people, raised cattle for 3 generations, but they say this bull just snapped one day. Started charging anyone who came near, destroyed thousands of dollars worth of equipment, became too dangerous to keep." As if sensing their conversation, Ironheart lifted his massive head and looked directly at Magnolia. For a moment that stretched longer than comfort should allow, woman and bull regarded each other across the space that separated predator from prey, danger from safety, the rejected from those still clinging to acceptance. "Has anyone tried to understand why he changed?" Magnolia asked quietly. Buck laughed, not unkindly, but with the dismissive humor of someone who'd seen too many city folk romanticize livestock. "Ma'am, bulls don't need understanding. They need managing, and when they can't be managed, they need selling." The auction began at 2 o'clock with smaller animals, goats that wouldn't breed, horses too old for riding, a llama with an attitude problem that had made him unsuitable as a therapy animal. Magnolia watched the rapid-fire bidding with growing sadness, seeing each sale as another creature whose usefulness had expired being passed along to whoever could afford their diminished value. When Ironheart's turn came, the energy in the barn shifted palpably. The bull was led into the ring by 2 handlers using specially designed poles that kept them well beyond his reach, and even then, everyone could see the tension in their movements. Ironheart's hooves thundered against the wooden floor as he circled the ring, his eyes scanning the crowd with what looked like contempt for the humans who'd gathered to judge him. "Now, folks, this here's a registered Angus bull, 5 years old, excellent bloodlines despite his temperament issues," Buck called out, his voice carrying over the nervous murmur of the crowd. "He's proven fertile, strong as they come, but I'm obligated to tell you he's got aggression problems that make him unsuitable for normal ranch operations." The bidding started low, ranchers looking for cheap beef rather than breeding stock, knowing that Ironheart's fate would likely be the slaughterhouse regardless of who bought him. Magnolia watched the numbers climb slowly, $50, $75, $100, each bid feeling like another nail in the coffin of whatever dreams this magnificent animal might have once represented. "Do I hear 150? Buck called, his gavel ready to fall on what everyone knew would be Ironheart's death sentence. That's when Magnolia surprised everyone in the barn, including herself. 200, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. Every head turned toward the small woman in the worn denim jacket who'd just bid on the most dangerous animal in Salem County. Buck's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline as he processed what he'd heard. "Ma'am, are you sure about that? This bull isn't suitable for someone without extensive cattle experience." Magnolia looked once more at Ironheart, who had stopped his agitated pacing and was staring directly at her with those intelligent, pain-filled eyes. In that moment, she saw something that reminded her powerfully of her own reflection in the months since Jasper's death. A creature that had been written off as dangerous when maybe, just maybe, he was simply heartbroken. $200, she repeated firmly. "And yes, I'm sure." The gavel fell with a sound like thunder, sealing a bargain that everyone in the barn was certain would end in tragedy. But as Magnolia walked toward the office to complete her paperwork, she felt something she hadn't experienced since the morning she'd found Jasper collapsed in their lavender field. Purpose. She had no idea how to handle an aggressive bull, no proper facilities for containing him, and barely enough money to feed herself, let alone a 2,000-pound animal with a reputation for violence. But sometimes the heart recognizes what the mind cannot understand, and Magnolia Ashworth's heart was telling her that she and Ironheart were meant to find each other. The widow who thought she was done with taking care of broken things had just purchased the most broken thing in Salem County. What happened next would surprise everyone, including herself. The livestock trailer that delivered Ironheart to Magnolia's lavender farm looked absurdly out of place among the neat rows of purple flowers and the modest white farmhouse that Jasper had painted just months before his death. Cody Blackwater, the young driver who'd volunteered for the job, kept glancing nervously at the trailer where ominous sounds suggested their passenger was anything but calm. "Mrs. Ashworth, I gotta be honest with you," Cody said, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool Oregon afternoon. "That bull's been kicking and carrying on the whole drive here. You sure you got proper containment for an animal like this?" Magnolia surveyed her property with new eyes, seeing it as others might. A small lavender farm with decorative split-rail fencing, a couple of old goats for weed control, and absolutely nothing designed to contain a dangerous bull. But something in her heart told her that maybe Ironheart didn't need containing. Maybe he needed understanding. "Just back the trailer up to the main pasture gate," she said with more confidence than she felt. "We'll figure it out." As Cody positioned the trailer, Magnolia's nearest neighbor, Sage Brightwater, came hurrying across the field that separated their properties. At 34, Sage ran a small organic vegetable farm and had become like a daughter to Magnolia since Jasper's death, often bringing soup and staying for evening conversations that kept the loneliness at bay. "Magnolia, what in heaven's name have you done?" Sage called out, her voice a mixture of concern and disbelief. "Delilah Riversong called me from 3 counties over. She heard you bought some killer bull at auction." "His name is Ironheart," Magnolia replied calmly. "And he's not a killer. He's just misunderstood." The trailer door opened with a metallic screech that seemed to echo across the entire valley. For a moment, nothing happened, just silence and the smell of hay and fear. Then Ironheart appeared at the opening, his massive black form filling the doorway completely, his dark eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings with what looked like suspicion, mixed with exhaustion. "Sweet mercy," Sage whispered, unconsciously stepping behind Magnolia despite the older woman being half her size. But Ironheart didn't charge or bellow or display any of the aggressive behaviors his reputation suggested. Instead, he stepped down from the trailer with surprising grace and stood perfectly still, his head raised high as he took in the scents of lavender, earth, and something else. Peace, perhaps, or simply the absence of fear. "Hello, beautiful boy," Magnolia said softly, approaching the bull with the same calm confidence she'd once used with agitated patients in the trauma ward. "Welcome to your new home." Ironheart's massive head turned toward her voice, and Magnolia could have sworn she saw recognition in his eyes, not of her specifically, but of a tone that promised safety rather than harm, understanding rather than judgment. "Magnolia, please step back," Sage pleaded, but the older woman continued her slow approach until she was close enough to see the scars that crisscrossed Ironheart's hide, evidence of chains, prods, and the kind of rough handling that would break any creature's spirit. "Oh, you poor thing," Magnolia whispered, her nurse's eye cataloging the evidence of abuse with growing anger. "What did they do to you?" Instead of responding with aggression, Ironheart lowered his enormous head until it was level with Magnolia's shoulder. The gesture was so gentle, so trusting, that even Cody stopped backing away and stared in amazement. "I've been hauling livestock for 15 years, the young driver said wonderingly. "And I ain't never seen a bull act like that with a stranger." Over the following days, a routine emerged that surprised everyone who witnessed it. Each morning, Magnolia would arrive at the pasture with a bucket of grain and find Ironheart waiting by the gate, not with the impatience of a demanding animal, but with the quiet anticipation of someone grateful for small kindnesses. "He's teaching me as much as I'm teaching him," Magnolia told Dr. River Stoneheart, the local veterinarian who'd come to evaluate Ironheart's condition and stayed to observe his remarkable behavior. "What do you mean, Doctor?" Stoneheart asked, making notes on her tablet while watching Ironheart carefully avoid stepping on the lavender plants as he moved through the field. "Patience. Jasper always said I was too quick to fix things, too impatient with healing that took time. But Ironheart..." Magnolia paused, watching the bull gently investigate a butterfly that had landed on his nose. "He's showing me that some healing can't be rushed. It has to happen in its own time, in its own way." The transformation wasn't just in Ironheart. Neighbors who'd come to gawk at the dangerous bull found themselves staying for coffee with Magnolia, sharing stories about their own struggles with loss, disappointment, and the challenge of starting over. The lavender farm became an unofficial gathering place for anyone who'd ever felt rejected or misunderstood. "It's like he's bringing people together," Sage observed one evening as they watched a small group of visitors feeding Ironheart handfuls of grass through the fence. People who've never spoken to each other before are suddenly friends. But the most remarkable change was in Magnolia herself. The quiet widow who'd been slowly fading away since Jasper's death had rediscovered her voice, her purpose, and her belief that caring for others, whether human or animal, was what gave life meaning. When the phone rang that Friday evening with news that would test everything they'd built together, Magnolia answered with the confidence of someone who'd learned that the most valuable things in life often come disguised as problems nobody else wants to solve. "Mrs. Ashworth, this is Channel 12 News in Portland. We'd like to do a story about your remarkable bull." The outside world had discovered their miracle, and Magnolia knew that their peaceful days were numbered. But looking at Ironheart, who was demonstrating his aggression by allowing her elderly goats to use him as a scratching post, she felt ready for whatever came next. Some stories were too important to keep secret, even if sharing them meant risking everything you'd worked to protect. The news crew from Channel 12 arrived on a foggy Tuesday morning, their white van looking starkly out of place among the peaceful lavender rows of Magnolia's farm. Reporter Autumn Clearbrook emerged with her cameraman, both wearing the polished professionalism of people accustomed to finding drama in everyday situations. "Mrs. Ashworth, we're here about the bull with the violent history," Autumn announced, her smile bright but her eyes calculating. "Our viewers love redemption stories, especially ones involving dangerous animals." Magnolia felt her protective instincts flare immediately. "Ironheart isn't dangerous, and he's not a story for entertainment. He's a living being who deserves respect." But as the morning progressed and Autumn witnessed Ironheart's gentle interactions with the farm's other animals, her skeptical reporter demeanor began to crack. When the massive bull carefully stepped around a nest of baby rabbits that had appeared overnight near the water trough, even the hardened cameraman lowered his equipment in amazement. "This can't be the same animal," Autumn murmured, reviewing footage on her camera. "The reports from Oregon describe a monster that attacked anyone who came near." "What reports?" Magnolia asked, though she dreaded the answer. Autumn pulled out her phone and showed Magnolia a series of disturbing videos and news articles. Ironheart charging fence lines, destroying equipment, sending ranch hands scrambling for safety. But as Magnolia studied the footage more carefully, her trained eye began noticing details that others had missed. "Look at his ears in these videos," she said, pointing to the screen. "They're pinned back in fear, not forward in aggression. And see how he always charges toward fences and gates? He's not trying to attack people. He's trying to escape." Dr. River Stoneheart arrived just as Autumn was preparing to leave, bringing with her a file that would change everyone's understanding of Ironheart's troubled past. "Magnolia, I've been researching Ironheart's medical history," the veterinarian said, her usually cheerful demeanor somber. "What I found at his previous location explains everything. The records painted a horrifying picture of systematic abuse disguised as training. Electric prods, painful restraints, forced confinement in spaces too small for his size, and worst of all, the deliberate separation from other cattle. A form of psychological torture for a naturally social animal. They were trying to break his spirit to make him more manageable, Dr. Stoneheart explained, her voice tight with professional anger. But bulls like Ironheart, intelligent, sensitive animals, don't break easily. They fight back. Magnolia felt tears burning her eyes as she read through the veterinary notes, each entry documenting another failed attempt to force compliance through cruelty. How long did this go on? Nearly 2 years. By the time they gave up and sent him to auction, Ironheart had learned that humans meant pain. His aggression was purely defensive. Autumn, who'd been listening to this revelation with growing horror, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. How did you know? How did you see what trained professionals missed? Magnolia was quiet for a long moment, watching Ironheart peacefully grazing near the lavender plants that gave her farm its distinctive scent, because I recognized the look in his eyes. It's the same one I saw in my mirror for months after Jasper died. The look of someone who's been hurt so badly that trusting again feels impossible. That afternoon, after the news crew had departed with footage that would air as a very different story than they'd originally planned, Magnolia received a phone call that made her blood run cold. Mrs. Ashworth, this is Titus Blackstone from Blackstone Ranch. I understand you've purchased our former bull. The voice belonged to the man whose ranch had put Ironheart through 2 years of systematic abuse, and he was calling with what he described as a generous offer to buy the bull back. I'll give you $5,000 profit on what you paid, Titus said, his tone suggesting he expected immediate acceptance. That bull's got bloodlines worth developing, and we've got new training methods we'd like to try. Mr. Blackstone, Magnolia replied, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. I've seen your training methods in Ironheart's medical records. The answer is no. Ma'am, you don't understand the liability you're taking on. That animal is unpredictable, dangerous. The only thing dangerous here is your ignorance, Magnolia interrupted, surprising herself with her vehemence. Ironheart isn't aggressive. He's traumatized. And he's staying exactly where he is. After hanging up, Magnolia walked to the pasture where Ironheart was demonstrating his dangerous nature by allowing Sage's twin daughters, Phoenix and River, to braid flowers into his tail. The sight of the massive bull standing patiently while 2 6-year-old girls decorated him with daisies would have made anyone question everything they thought they knew about aggressive animals. You're safe now, Magnolia whispered, stroking Ironheart's neck as the girls giggled and played around his hooves. Nobody's ever going to hurt you again. But even as she made that promise, Magnolia knew that keeping it would be more challenging than she'd anticipated. Word of Ironheart's transformation was spreading beyond Salem County, bringing attention that could be both blessing and curse. The bull who'd been branded as dangerous had found sanctuary with a woman who understood that sometimes the most broken hearts hold the most love. But in a world that often preferred simple labels to complex truths, protecting that sanctuary would require more courage than either of them had yet been tested to give. As the Oregon sunset painted the lavender fields in shades of purple and gold, Magnolia made a silent vow to the bull who'd brought purpose back to her empty days. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, proving that love could heal even the deepest wounds when someone was brave enough to see past the scars to the heart underneath. 3 weeks after the Channel 12 news story aired, Magnolia's quiet lavender farm had become an unlikely pilgrimage site. Cars with license plates from across the Pacific Northwest filled her gravel driveway as families, animal lovers, and curious onlookers came to witness the miracle bull who'd found peace through compassion. But it was the letter that arrived on a Wednesday morning that would change everything. The envelope bore the official seal of the Oregon State Veterinary Board, and inside was a formal complaint filed by Titus Blackstone, alleging that Magnolia was harboring a dangerous animal without proper facilities or expertise. They're demanding an immediate inspection, Dr. River Stoneheart explained after reviewing the legal documents. If the state finds any safety violations, they can order Ironheart's removal and euthanization. Magnolia felt her world tilting dangerously. After months of peaceful coexistence, the specter of losing Ironheart to bureaucratic interference felt like losing Jasper all over again. Sudden, cruel, and completely beyond her control. When? She asked, her voice barely steady. Tomorrow morning, Dr. Flint Ravencrest from the State Board will be conducting the evaluation personally. That night, Magnolia lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of Ironheart moving peacefully through the pasture. Through her bedroom window, she could see his massive silhouette outlined against the star-filled Oregon sky, and the sight filled her with a fierce protectiveness she hadn't felt since her nursing days. Dr. Flint Ravencrest arrived precisely at 9 a.m. in a state vehicle equipped with animal control equipment that made Magnolia's stomach clench with anxiety. At 52, he carried himself with the rigid authority of someone who'd built his career on following regulations rather than understanding individual circumstances. "Mrs. Ashworth, I'm here to evaluate the safety conditions for the bull known as Ironheart," he announced formally, consulting a clipboard thick with paperwork. "I must warn you that based on this animal's documented history of violence, I'm prepared to order immediate removal if I find any safety concerns." "Then I suppose you'll want to meet him," Magnolia replied, leading Dr. Ravencrest toward the main pasture where Ironheart stood peacefully among the lavender plants. What followed challenged every assumption Dr. Ravencrest had formed about the situation. Instead of the raging beast described in Titus Blackstone's complaint, he found himself observing an animal whose behavior was nothing short of extraordinary. Ironheart approached the fence with cautious dignity, his movements deliberate and controlled. When Dr. Ravencrest extended his hand for the bull to investigate, Ironheart sniffed gently before backing away to a respectful distance. The behavior of an animal who understood boundaries and respected them. "This is highly unusual," Dr. Ravencrest muttered, making rapid notes. According to his file, this bull should be showing signs of agitation or territorial behavior. "Maybe his file is wrong," suggested Sage, who'd arrived with her twin daughters to provide moral support. "Maybe the problem was never with Ironheart." Dr. Ravencrest spent 3 hours conducting his evaluation, testing Ironheart's responses to various stimuli, observing his interactions with other animals, and documenting behavior that contradicted everything in the official reports. The bull remained calm throughout, occasionally approaching the fence to check on Magnolia, but never showing the slightest sign of aggression. The breakthrough moment came when Phoenix, one of Sage's 6-year-old daughters, accidentally dropped her favorite doll through the fence into Ironheart's pasture. Before anyone could react, the massive bull had gently picked up the toy with his teeth and carefully placed it back through the fence rails where the little girl could reach it. "Extraordinary," Dr. Ravencrest breathed, his clinical detachment cracking for the first time. "I've never seen cognitive empathy like this in a bovine." That afternoon, Dr. Ravencrest made a phone call that would vindicate everything Magnolia believed about Ironheart. He contacted Dr. Jasmine Wildwood, the state's leading animal behaviorist, and requested an emergency consultation about what he'd witnessed. "Dr. Wildwood, I need you to see this animal immediately," he said, his voice filled with unprecedented excitement. "What I'm observing here challenges everything we think we know about trauma recovery in large animals." Dr. Wildwood arrived the next morning with a team of graduate students and enough recording equipment to document what she suspected might be a groundbreaking case study. But like everyone else who met Ironheart, she found herself putting away her scientific instruments and simply observing the remarkable relationship between the bull and his human. "Magnolia," Dr. Wildwood said after spending an entire day at the farm, "what you've accomplished here isn't just rehabilitation, it's revolutionary. Ironheart's emotional recovery has been so complete that he's exhibiting behaviors we've never documented in cattle, such as protective instincts toward smaller animals, emotional recognition of human distress, problem-solving abilities that suggest abstract thinking. This bull isn't just healed, he's thriving intellectually and emotionally." The vindication felt wonderful, but Magnolia knew their challenges were far from over. Word of Dr. Ravencrest's glowing report had reached Titus Blackstone, who was now threatening legal action to reclaim what he called his stolen property. "Let him try," Magnolia said with steel in her voice as she read Blackstone's threatening letter. That man lost any claim to Ironheart the moment he chose cruelty over kindness. But as evening fell over the lavender farm, Magnolia couldn't shake the feeling that their peaceful sanctuary was about to be tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. The world had discovered their miracle, and not everyone who came calling would have Ironheart's best interests at heart. Standing beside the bull who'd taught her that healing was possible even after the deepest wounds, Magnolia made a promise that would define everything that followed. She would protect this gentle giant's peace with the same fierce determination she'd once brought to saving human lives. Because sometimes the most important battles are fought not for glory or profit, but for the right of damaged souls to find sanctuary with those who understand that being broken doesn't mean being worthless. Ironheart had saved her from drowning in grief. Now it was her turn to save him from a world that still couldn't see past his scars to the magnificent heart underneath. The lawsuit papers arrived on a crisp October morning, delivered by a process server who seemed uncomfortable disturbing the peaceful atmosphere of Magnolia's lavender farm. Titus Blackstone was demanding the immediate return of Ironheart, claiming that the sale at Cloverdale Livestock Auction had been conducted under false pretenses, and that Magnolia lacked the legal right to keep such a valuable breeding asset. "He's not seeking monetary damages," explained Luna Greyhawk, the sharp-eyed attorney Sage had recommended after mortgaging her own farm to pay the legal fees. "This is about ownership. Blackstone wants Ironheart back, and he's willing to spend whatever it takes to get him." Magnolia studied the legal documents with growing horror, recognizing the clinical language that reduced Ironheart to property rather than acknowledging him as the sentient being she'd come to know. "What are our chances? Honestly? Not good. Oregon law heavily favors livestock owners, especially when dealing with valuable breeding animals. Unless we can prove Blackstone was negligent or abusive in his care." "We can prove it," Magnolia said firmly, thinking of the veterinary records Dr. River Stoneheart had uncovered. "We have documentation of systematic abuse," but Luna's expression remained troubled. "That's where it gets complicated. Blackstone's lawyers are arguing that what you call abuse was standard livestock management practices. Without witnesses willing to testify about specific acts of cruelty, it becomes our word against established agricultural procedures." The media attention that had once felt like validation now became a double-edged sword. While supporters rallied around Magnolia and Ironheart's story, critics questioned whether a widow living alone had the resources and expertise to properly care for such a large animal long-term. "She's anthropomorphizing a bull," declared Dr. Sterling Blackwood, a livestock management expert who'd been retained by Blackstone's legal team. "What she interprets as intelligence and emotional connection is simply learned behavior. This animal belongs in a professional breeding facility, not on a hobby farm." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for November 15th, giving both sides 3 weeks to prepare their cases. During this time, Magnolia's farm became a battlefield of competing narratives, supporters bringing flowers and letters of encouragement, while protesters carried signs demanding that dangerous animals be kept in proper facilities. Through it all, Ironheart remained a model of gentle dignity, seemingly oblivious to the legal storm raging around his future. His daily routines continued unchanged: morning greetings with Magnolia, peaceful grazing among the lavender plants, and patient tolerance of the growing crowds of visitors who came to witness his remarkable transformation. It was during this tense period that an unexpected ally emerged. Dr. River Stoneheart received a phone call that would change everything. "Dr. Stoneheart? This is Coyote Riversong. I used to work at Blackstone Ranch, and I heard about the court case. There are things about that bull's treatment that people need to know." Coyote had been a ranch hand at Blackstone's facility during Ironheart's 2-year ordeal, and his testimony would provide the missing piece of their legal puzzle. But convincing him to testify publicly would require overcoming his fear of retaliation from one of Oregon's most powerful agricultural families. "Mr. Blackstone's got influence all through this county," Coyote explained during a secret meeting at Magnolia's farm. "I speak against him. I'll never work cattle again. But what they did to that bull—" He paused, watching Ironheart peacefully investigate a butterfly that had landed on his nose. "It wasn't right. It wasn't training. It was torture." The details Coyote provided were worse than anything in the official records. Prolonged isolation, deliberate food deprivation to increase aggression, electric shock discipline that went far beyond standard cattle prods. Most damning of all, he had photographs on his phone documenting injuries that had never appeared in any veterinary reports. "Why didn't you report this when it happened?" Luna asked. "To who? Blackstone donates to every sheriff's campaign, sponsors the county fair, sits on the agricultural board. You think anyone was going to take the word of a ranch hand over Titus Blackstone?" As the hearing date approached, the case began attracting national attention. Animal rights organizations offered support, Agricultural associations defended traditional livestock management, and cable news programs debated whether emotional bonds between humans and farm animals could override property rights. But for Magnolia, the approaching legal battle represented something far more personal than a debate about animal welfare. As she sat with Ironheart under their favorite oak tree on the evening before the hearing, she realized that this gentle bull had become more than just a rescued animal. He'd become the symbol of her own recovery from grief. "You saved me, you know," she whispered, stroking his massive neck as the Oregon sunset painted the lavender fields in shades of purple and gold. "When Jasper died, I thought my life was over. But you showed me that broken hearts can heal when someone cares enough to be patient." Ironheart's response was to rest his enormous head against her shoulder, a gesture of trust and affection that had become as natural as breathing between them. Tomorrow would determine whether love could triumph over legal technicalities, whether the bond they'd built could withstand the cold machinery of a justice system that struggled to recognize animals as anything more than property. But sitting there in the gathering twilight with her gentle giant, Magnolia felt a peace that no court decision could touch. Whatever happened, they'd proven that understanding could heal the deepest wounds, that patience could triumph over cruelty, and that sometimes the most important victories were measured not in legal decisions, but in the simple act of two damaged souls finding wholeness together. The battle for Ironheart's soul would be decided tomorrow, but the battle for their hearts had already been won. The Salem County Courthouse had never seen anything like it. By 8 a.m. on November 15th, supporters from across Oregon had gathered on the courthouse steps, many carrying handmade signs reading, "Save Ironheart" and "Love Heals All Wounds." Counter-protesters representing agricultural interests held their own banners declaring property rights matter and stop animal extremism. Inside courtroom 3, Judge Aurora Whitehawk called the proceedings to order, with the gravity befitting a case that had captured national attention. At 49, she was known for her methodical approach to complex legal issues, but even she seemed affected by the emotional weight of determining an animal's fate based on competing definitions of ownership and welfare. Titus Blackstone sat at the plaintiff's table wearing an expensive suit that couldn't hide his nervous energy. At 58, he'd built his ranch into one of Oregon's most profitable cattle operations. But the negative publicity surrounding his treatment of Ironheart had begun affecting his business relationships. Winning this case wasn't just about reclaiming property, it was about salvaging his reputation. "Your Honor," began his attorney, Maxwell Silverbrook, "this case is fundamentally about property rights and the specialized care that valuable breeding animals require. Mr. Blackstone invested significant resources in Ironheart's development and has both the legal ownership and professional expertise to ensure this animal's optimal productivity." Magnolia sat with Luna Greyhawk at the defendant's table, her hands folded calmly despite the storm of anxiety in her chest. Behind them, Dr. River Stoneheart, Sage Brightwater, and dozens of supporters filled the gallery, creating a wall of moral support that helped steady her resolve. "Your Honor," Luna began her opening statement, "this case is about far more than property rights. It's about whether we as a society will recognize that intelligent, emotional beings cannot be treated as mere commodities, and whether cruelty can be excused by calling it standard practice." The first day of testimony focused on establishing Ironheart's value and history. Blackstone's experts testified about the bull's premium bloodlines, his potential breeding value, and the substantial investment required for proper cattle management. They painted Magnolia as a well-meaning but unqualified amateur whose emotional attachment was clouding her judgment about the animal's needs. But when Dr. Sterling Blackwood took the stand to describe Ironheart's aggressive behaviors at the ranch, Luna's cross-examination began exposing the truth behind those incidents. "Dr. Blackwood, you described the defendant's bull as charging handlers. Can you distinguish between aggressive charging and escape attempts?" "Well, the result is the same. Dangerous behavior that threatens human safety. But the motivation is entirely different, isn't it? An animal trying to escape confinement is exhibiting survival instinct, not aggression." The courtroom tension was palpable as Luna methodically dismantled the narrative of Ironheart as an inherently dangerous animal, replacing it with evidence of an intelligent creature responding rationally to abusive treatment. The turning point came on the second day when Coyote Riversong took the stand. Despite obvious nervousness, his testimony was devastating in its simplicity and detail. "I worked at Blackstone Ranch for 3 years," he said, his voice steady despite Titus Blackstone's glaring presence across the courtroom. What they did to Ironheart wasn't training. It was systematic torture designed to break his spirit. Coyote's cell phone photographs, admitted as evidence over strenuous objections from Blackstone's lawyers, showed Ironheart with injuries that painted a horrifying picture of deliberate cruelty. Electric burn marks, rope cuts from excessive restraints, and documented weight loss from food deprivation created a timeline of abuse that even the judge seemed shaken by. "Mr. Riversong," Maxwell Silverbrook challenged during cross-examination, "isn't it true that you were terminated from Blackstone Ranch for insubordination?" "Yes, sir, because I refused to use cattle prods on animals that were already down. Mr. Blackstone said I was too soft for ranch work." But the most powerful moment came when Judge Whitehawk requested that Ironheart himself be brought to the courthouse for evaluation. The decision was unprecedented in Oregon livestock law, but the judge felt that observing the animal's current condition was essential for making an informed ruling. The sight of Ironheart being led gently through the courthouse corridor created a surreal moment that would be remembered in legal history. The massive bull moved with calm dignity, his presence somehow transforming the sterile institutional space into something more human, more connected to the natural world that law too often forgot. In the courthouse parking lot, with both legal teams observing, Magnolia demonstrated her relationship with Ironheart. The bull's responses to her voice commands, his gentle interaction with children from the crowd, and his obvious contentment created a stark contrast to the violent, unpredictable animal described in Blackstone's testimony. "This is the same animal?" Judge Whitehawk asked Dr. Riverstonehart, who was documenting Ironheart's behavior for the court record. "Physically, yes, but psychologically, he's been completely transformed through patient, compassionate care. What you're seeing is what he was always capable of becoming, given the right environment." The judge's deliberations lasted 3 days, during which speculation filled newspapers and social media about the precedent this case might set for animal welfare law. Legal experts debated whether emotional bonds between humans and animals could supersede traditional property rights, while animal behaviorists discussed the implications of recognizing psychological trauma in livestock. When court reconvened for the verdict, Judge Whitehawk's words would reverberate far beyond Salem County. "This court finds that while Mr. Blackstone retains technical ownership rights under Oregon livestock law, those rights were forfeited through documented abuse and neglect that constituted willful destruction of the animal's value and well-being. The evidence shows that Ironheart's aggressive behavior was directly caused by systematic mistreatment, and his remarkable recovery under Mrs. Ashworth's care demonstrates that the proper remedy is permanent relinquishment of ownership rights to the defendant." The courtroom erupted in cheers from Magnolia's supporters, while Blackstone's legal team huddled in urgent consultation about appeals. But Judge Whitehawk wasn't finished. Furthermore, this court is recommending that the Oregon State Legislature consider broader protections for farm animals, recognizing that intelligence and emotional capacity create moral obligations that supersede purely economic considerations. As Magnolia walked out of the courthouse with Ironheart's legal ownership finally secure, she felt Jasper's presence in the autumn wind that stirred the oak leaves overhead. The bull who'd been rejected, abused, and written off as dangerous had not only found sanctuary, he'd become the catalyst for changing how society viewed the relationship between humans and animals. That evening, back at the lavender farm where their journey had begun, Magnolia sat with Ironheart under their favorite tree, watching the Oregon sunset paint their world in shades of hope. "We did it, beautiful boy," she whispered, stroking his massive neck as he rested his head in her lap. "Nobody can ever hurt you again." The widow who'd thought her life was over had discovered that sometimes the most profound purpose comes from protecting those who cannot protect themselves. And the bull who'd been branded as dangerous had proven that love really could heal the deepest wounds when someone was brave enough to see past the scars to the magnificent heart underneath. Their story would inspire legislation, change minds, and touch hearts across the country. But for Magnolia and Ironheart, the greatest victory was simply this. Two damaged souls had found each other at exactly the right moment, proving that healing is always possible when someone cares enough to try. In this story of redemption and the courage to stand against cruelty, A grieving widow and an abused bull discover that the most powerful force in the world isn't violence or profit, but the transformative power of unconditional love and understanding. They tried to sell the aggressive bull, but a widow saw his true heart.